Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 238. I'm delighted to welcome back onto the podcast. It's been a fair amount of time since your last appearance, Adam, hasn't it? Adam Parr, welcome back.
And thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a couple of years, but I'm really excited to kind of dive into what we're going to be discussing today.
It's been a couple of years, but there's been a hell of a change for yourself and in terms of role and everything that's been going on, which we'll get into in a little bit. When we previously spoke, I'm pretty sure you were in an assistant strength conditioning coach role. Now as a head of performance at Charlotte FC, which we'll get into in a little bit. I know in the previous episode, which was actually episode 119, that was back in January 21. So there's all sorts of chaos in the world going on at that point. Yeah. But you to give a little bit of background on that episode, but can you do the same on this one and also take us into the move from your previous role to your current role?
Yeah, absolutely. So background and career for the most part, did my undergrad at San Diego State. Anyone who's in the States knows, our basketball team made it all the way to the national championship this year. Unfortunately, we came up short, but it was a good run. So have a really good kinesiology program there. And so got my undergrad in kines. And then shortly after that, wound up going up to LA. And I started with an internship with Exos now. Back then it was Core Performance. That's how old and dated I am. And back then there was only, I believe, 3 locations. There was one Core Performance and 2 Athletes Performance locations, another one in LA and another one in Phoenix. And obviously now they're all over the world. So that is kind of where I started my performance journey. Because initially I thought I was going to be a physical therapist when I was doing my undergrad and go to PT school. Kind of changed and pivoted, decided I wanted to, prevent athletes from getting injured as opposed to maybe being on the rehab side, and really formed my methodology there. And during my internship, got to be around a lot of really fantastic people and got to meet Mark Verstegen once or twice when he came through, and all of the top brass of Exos. And after I was done there, wound up being in a sports medicine clinic in the Beverly Hills area for a little bit. And just by happenstance, my boss at the time, his best friend, was the head athletic trainer for one of the Major League Soccer teams in LA, and it was Chivas USA, which if people know, they do not exist anymore. They were basically bought, folded for a few years, and then rebranded as LAFC, who are the current reigning champion. So I was there, went on board as a sports science intern, met with Jim Liston, who was the head strength coach there. And, basically he put it to me and said, I've got this heart rate monitoring program and I've been running it with the team for a few months. Haven't really had the time to dive into the data and look and see and make it actionable and whether or not it's worth what we're doing. So, as an intern, I'm giving you basically a month to figure out how to run this thing, make it actionable for us, and something I can use to report to the coaches. Otherwise, I don't need you around, basically, because he wasn't a fan of interns to begin with. And I wound up being there for a year and a half. So finished out that time. And that program was the Polar Team 2 system, because this is back in, I want to say 2011, 2012, somewhere around there. So, GPS hadn't even hit the States yet as far as, how it is now. And it was still in its infancy, especially in MLS. There wasn't too much going on. Everyone was using heart rate stuff. So that was my first kind of exposure to any sports science per se, because my undergrad had just been in kines and all the exercise science and movement type of stuff, and really fell in love with a lot of it. Wound up staying on the rest of that season as the intern, and then became Jim's assistant part-time the next year. And then, as happens in football all the time, at the end of that season, a new owner bought the team and basically got rid of the whole coaching staff. And so, that meant that I was no longer going to be there as well. Luckily, Jim is the owner of a large sports performance center that has multiple locations across the country, and the headquarters is in Pasadena, California. And so he basically said, why don't you come and continue doing this work for me with some of the academy teams that we work with, and then some colleges as well. And so I continued to kind of do the heart rate monitoring with the Team 2 system. We got some other teams on it, and I was doing that, and also a performance coach. And also at the same time, I started my own business as a fitness and performance coach in Beverly Hills area, training private clients anywhere from, stay-at-home moms to, athletes in their off season, and youth athletes in college and everything in between. And so was kind of doing both of those part-time. And Jim and the other coaching staff from Chivas wound up getting the the gigs up in Toronto at Toronto FC, and he started the sports science department up there, but didn't have a full-time position for me. And he was honest and just said, I'm not going to have you move halfway across the country for a part-time position right now for what we were doing. And he had another strength coach that he was going to bring in as his head strength coach, who was Tom Williams he was at Leicester back then. And so kind of just stayed at his place in Pasadena and then continued to build out my own private clientele and kind of really focused on that for a while. But all the while was really wanting to get back in the team setting, kind of really missed it and missed a lot of the sports science stuff, and stumbled across through some contacts that I had and some people I was working with the Master of High Performance Sport program at Australian Catholic University, and kind of looked at it a lot and realized that it was everything that I was interested in as far as kind of combining the performance and the sports science and the data. And I was just running my private company at the time, and it was great. And I was working alongside some really amazing coaches. Brett Bartholomew was training out of the same facility I was at. Ben Bruno was there. Natalie Kolars, if people follow Exos, who's high up there now, she was training there for a bit too. And it was great, but really, really wanted to be in the team setting, and decided to kind of dive into that master's program as a way to, level up my knowledge on the years I'd missed. And through some connections and some people that I'd worked with at Chivas USA who had moved on and were now at the head athletic trainer at San Jose Earthquakes in MLS. He basically said, we'd love to have you come on board, do your capstone internship as our kind of sports scientist. And we were in discussions, and they had an affiliate team, basically like a under 23 reserves, that was based out of Reno, Nevada, playing in a lower league, like basically the second tier here, the USL Championship. And they basically said, we don't have a strength coach or a sports scientist, on board there. So you can go there and basically run a department as your internship, so to speak, for the, few months of the end of the season. And then basically, as long as you don't screw it up, like, we're going to offer the role the whole full time, because we need someone there full time who knows what they're doing. And so I jumped at the chance. I was ready to leave LA and, packed my bags and moved up to Reno, which was a wonderful time for me because obviously it was the second division, so not as much pressure. And I was also doing my master's program at the same time. So I was literally studying at night and could apply what I was learning the very next day. And we had a lot of players who were young, kind of, homegrowns that had come up, or academy type players that had moved up, or younger players, to try and see who we could filter up to the first team. So I could kind of experiment a little bit more than you can at the first team level. And so I really got to, figure out exactly how I wanted to do things. If I'm running my own program from a performance standpoint, from the sports science, the data, like the coaching reports, everything that you could think of, because I was a one-man band, and was there for 2 seasons, and wound up moving on from there and became the assistant performance specialist with Minnesota United in MLS. So kind of got back to the first team level and was there a couple months, moved there in January 2020, and halfway across the country, somewhere I didn't know anybody. And then all of a sudden, COVID happened, and we're locked down basically. And that was a interesting and challenging time, because at the time I was just responsible for the strength programming, and we couldn't be in the gym at all. Even when we started up with the training sessions and the individuals and the small groups and stuff like that outside, the state of Minnesota didn't allow you to be indoors for anything at all. So I couldn't even come to the sessions. And so I was doing Zoom workouts 3 times a week with the players, and then writing up their programs for them to do based on whatever they had available, because some of them couldn't go in their own apartment gyms because of the state regulations and things like that. So it was all body weight. It was crazy. And then once the league decided that they were going to come back out of COVID and start back up again, my boss, who was the head of fitness and rehab, decided to leave the club. And we had actually lost our sports scientist right before the start of the season to another team. And we were in the process of looking for somebody when COVID happened and everything shut down. So club came to me and basically said, can you do all 3 jobs for right now? We were going in MLS when we started back up. We went and did a tournament in a bubble in Orlando. And so they just said, for the bubble, for however long we're there, like, you'll do all 3 jobs, then we'll reassess after that and see what we can do. And obviously I'd done all of that in Reno. So I said, yeah, of course, this is my time to shine, hopefully, and prove myself at this level. And we wound up going to the bubble and did really well, made it to the semifinal. And, I think we set some good foundations there. And then so when we came out of it, the club said, we're just going to have you continue on doing all three because, we don't have the budget right now to hire anybody on because we're on a freeze. So continued on the rest of 2020, doing all three roles as basically the head fitness, head strength coach, and then head sports scientist, which was insane because the fixture congestion was unlike anything we've ever seen before, obviously. But it was also really good for me to prove to myself that I could, I belonged at this level, I think, and also to coaches, players, other staff, etc. And we had a great run. Again, made it to the semifinal of MLS playoffs and really should have been in the final. I think we were up 2 goals with 10 minutes left, 15 minutes left, and wound up losing 3-2 in extra time or in stoppage time. And so that was a bit of a gut punch, but it was a great experience. And then the following year, stayed on, and we actually brought the club brought over Damien Rodin, who had been over at Anderlecht. He'd been at Seattle Sounders here to be like the high performance director, and I stayed on as the hybrid strength coach and sports scientist. But the Damien and the coaches didn't necessarily see eye to eye on a lot of things, and there was a lot of pushback from the club on some stuff, and he wound up leaving about 4 or 5 months in, and so they kind of turned to me again and said, okay, for the rest of the season you're gonna run the show again and be the one-man band. So did that again through 2021. We made playoffs again, early exit that year, but it was still a decent year. And all in that time, I'd been named head of strength conditioning at Minnesota United in that process, and was looking for something a little bit more to kind of challenge me. And I got a call from my current boss at Charlotte FC, who he was at the Portland Timbers at the time, and he basically just said, "Hey, I'm going to Charlotte as the director of performance sports science medicine. I need somebody who can fill a hybrid role of the strength coach and sports scientist, and I'm asking around, and you're the name that keeps coming up. So let me tell you about this project." And because we had actually never really met. And so he just said, let me tell you about this project and see if you'd be interested in coming. And the more we were discussing it, the more interesting it was for myself and my wife, who at the time was just my girlfriend. And it just seemed like an opportunity too good to pass up as far as the role, but also getting to be with a club from day one, because it was an expansion club. So for any listeners who don't realize that, like, we still have teams in MLS who are starting from square one. We're still adding teams as the league grows. And so, I mean, it was literally you're starting year one and get to kind of build whatever foundations and culture and everything that you want. And so that was kind of too good of an opportunity to pass up to be a part of that, because I felt like I may not ever get this chance again. Came on board as the performance specialist, like I said, kind of a dual role. And then shortly, within a few months, the head coach, who was the initial head coach, and his head fitness coach and their coaching staff were let go due to some other things. And I basically assumed the same thing I'd done previously, where I was running everything on the performance side. Obviously, I had my boss overlooking things, but I was the one performance coach who was really on staff and running all of that. And then we were able to bring an assistant on for a little bit at the end of last year, and then in the off season was promoted to head of performance, and kind of now really building out the foundations for the performance department for the top down, at multiple levels, and kind of building that out from here on out, and including a new facility that's coming online in a couple months, and all sorts of fun projects that go along with it. So it's been quite the ride. Sorry for rambling a bit, but I just realized I've had so many different turns and directions, and it has been a ride since we last spoke.
No, it's a brilliant breakdown, Adam, of even previously before we spoke, the career so far, and there's plenty of takeaways even from that for the listeners. I wanted to tap into currently what you've got going on, but also what you've done recently. And I think one of the first things is, obviously, we've talked about on the podcast before with practitioners around building the program from scratch, so not being much in place, but they might have done little bits before. We are talking from complete scratch now. And one area I wanted to start on is building a culture, because a lot of cultures come from time, don't they? They come from habits and daily habits that you're doing day on day that players get to learn, coaches get to learn. How did you go about that? And what were some of the considerations that you wanted to put in place from day one that you knew was going to create or help to create the culture that you wanted?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for me also, it was unlike anything I've ever experienced as far as the challenge, because you think about it, again, starting from square one, for most of us, as a staff, most of us had never worked together. You know, one of our physios or athletic trainers had worked with me at Minnesota United, so we had a little bit of a history together. But everyone else was brand new, including coaches to each other and also to, you know, the rest of the staff from the medical and performance side. But then you got to think about it, all of the players are brand new to each other too. So you got 30 players coming in out of nowhere from all over the world, and now all of a sudden they have to be a cohesive unit, right? And so it was just a huge challenge from all different angles. And I think for myself and for the rest of kind of our staff and my boss John, our number one thing was, so like, how can we create buy-in to what we're doing? And it was challenging at first because we were hired separately from with the head coach and his head fitness coach and a couple of their coaching staff. And so his head fitness coach and the head coach had a very different philosophy on performance than we did. You know, they didn't really want the guys in the gym much. They didn't really want, like, they didn't believe in the physical aspect. It was all technical, tactical, all this other stuff. And, you know, we were trying to educate them. They had never coached in MLS before. And we were trying to educate them on the fact that, like, it's a very physical league, right? Not just in the tackles and things like that, but it's very much speed, power, you know, and work rate, things like that. And it was a little bit of butting heads for a while, trying to educate them on all of the physical aspects, the things that we needed to do. And we had a lot of players who had played in the league and come from various teams who were coming to us during preseason and stuff saying, like, hey, I don't feel like I'm going to be prepared. I need to do extra with you guys. I need to do extra gym sessions. I need to do this. And so trying to find our role in that without, you know, undermining what the coach and his head fitness coach had in mind, but also wanting to make sure that the players were prepared, and also that we were going to keep them at a decreased risk of injury once the season started. And so we started looking at kind of small victories. What are the things that we can do? How can we, first off, convince the head fitness coach and various other parties that we need to do this before training. There are certain strength and power things we need to do after training when we have access to the gym. We need to do certain things on the conditioning side. We need, and just how can we build in, how can we ask questions to get them to think about it and convince them and show them, data, research, etc. From that side, and we started looking at small victories on what we could do there, but also with the players, it was, what are the small victories? What are the minimal effective doses we can do for certain things, like getting them in just for testing, and then educating them on why it's important, and why, they're testing, from readiness or performance testing, certain values are shown, like why we need to increase, doing stuff in the gym because we need to get them above minimum thresholds that we show, risk for injury, and what are things we can do before training for prehab exercises, and, can we do some movement prep before training, like just little things like that we start stacking on top of each other once we kind of have a little more buy-in, a little more buy-in, a little more buy-in. Because we had a very heavily South American roster based on the preference of the coach. And a lot of those guys had been at, clubs where they didn't really have access to a lot of things from the physical side. And so we had very low training ages of guys in the gym or even doing a lot of the physical capacity work. And so really trying to start at the lowest level that we could for certain players and build them up, while also meeting other guys where they are and continue to build them up, kind of systematically along the same line. And, one guy may be totally bought in on this and we don't need to worry about it, but there may be 3 other guys that aren't. So how do we educate them to get them doing this at least, so that next we can go here and then next we can go here? And so I think that was kind of how we started to row the boat in the same direction, I think, and get the head fitness coach and the rest of the staff on board with that. And I think we started to turn things around and really kind of push things in the same direction. And then once the head coach and his staff were let go, about 4 months of the season, and we took over everything solely on the performance side, it was like, okay, well, now we've already been putting these little things in place. So the players are used to it. They're bought in on these things. How do we make sure that we button up and we do these things really, really well? But then what are the additional things that we want to add that we know in our hearts and based on research and experience, like we know we need to be doing these more often, better, on a more consistent basis, whatever it is. to add to those things to bulletproof these players so that they're more resilient, more robust, they're stronger, they're more powerful, they can withstand the demands of their position, the game, etc. And so then we were able to kind of layer stuff on top of each other for the rest of the season and really have an effective overall physical development program for all of the players.
Well, what were those things, Adam?
So I think the main thing was, at least initially, what again, just doing our testing on a regular basis. We do weekly readiness tests. Obviously, there's a million things out there in research about different tests you can do, but we like to do, counter movement jump, looking at, neuromuscular fatigue on +3-ish for the most part, depending on the week. Looking at RSI and things like that. But then we're also looking at stuff on the back end from a performance standpoint, as far as eccentric break in RFD, concentric RFD, impulse, things like that, so that we know, if we see longitudinally things are starting to drop, okay, well, how do we address that, or how do we work on that, in the gym, and getting buy-in from the guys that way. But then looking at hamstring readiness on our -3s, where we know we're going to do sprint prep and sprint work and high speed running and things like that, and also our adductors and abductors in the groin bar force frame on +3s as well, -4s, and just getting guys used to doing that, and then educating them why, and then showing them the data and saying, okay, this is why after training on -4s and -3s, when we have our mandatory gym sessions, this is why we're focusing on this, and this is why we're focusing on this. We need to improve you here, we need to improve you there. And then as guys are starting to see their numbers go up, and correspondingly at times say, like, I'm feeling better, I'm feeling stronger, I feel this, or I'm getting faster, things like that, like the light bulb starts to go off for them. They're like, oh, all these things that they're putting in place for me, they're all connected, and they're all to help me, perform better, stay healthy, and stay available, right? And so I think it was us just connecting those dots, and then also having layering in stuff like, prehab exercises that focus on specific individual things for the players that they need based on their injury history and whatnot, or their position, but also, having it a link and align with what the demands are going to be that day. If it's going to be a small space day, and a lot of change of direction, probably not going to be doing as much focus on posterior chain hamstring stuff, depending on the guy, because we're not going to be asking them to sprint, get a lot of volume of sprinting, or even close to maximally. Whereas the next day we might be focusing a little bit more on that from their prehab exercises, and then that links to the test that we do for the hamstrings, and then the warm up, and then the actual session, and then after training we do posterior chain stuff. And so they start to see all of those things build, and they're all kind of linked. And I think the more we educated them on that, the more they understood and thought, oh, okay, like, one, these guys know what they're doing, like it's not just willy-nilly all over the place, and also two, they're paying attention to the data and what we're telling them and what they're seeing, to try and correct it, to keep me on the field and available for selection and hopefully performing well.
Yeah, 100%. Just tying in with that as well, with how you've designed the program, and then the testing, everything that you've just mentioned, comes what you referenced before, was the new facility. So you've created this program, you've made the additions to it, then comes the design. I'm sure those are points that has come before that, but what I wanted to cover is some of the priorities that you had in mind from the program to the actual physical design of the facility. So what were some initial priorities for you, and then also maybe some of the challenges, some of the changes that you had to make along the process?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that was first and foremost on our minds, between myself and my boss, who were the ones who really dove into designing this, number one was, how much space can we have? And so I reached out to a lot of people around Major League Soccer, because there's a lot of teams here who have had recent new facilities built in the last 5 years or so, whether it's new teams like expansion teams like us coming online, or existing teams that just had updates or brand new facilities made. And I reached out to a lot of my counterparts and just said, hey, what are the 2 or 3 things you wish you had done differently, and now that you know what you know. And the number one thing that every single person said was, I wish we had more space. I wish we had more space. I wish we had more space. Right. And so that was kind of the number one thing, is we wanted to go to bat with everybody, who was making the decisions on the facility and who was going to be placed there and how much space and how it was going to look, was we need to have X amount of space, and we knew it was going to get cut down. Like that's just the way it is, right? With any sort of construction project. So we started out asking for almost double what we wanted, right? Or what we felt like was a minimum that we would be acceptable or accept. And so we were asking for 4,500 to 5,000 square feet, and we knew that wasn't going to happen. But we said, hey, if it comes anywhere close to that, we're going to be feeling fantastic, right? And so that was the thing that we were pushing for, and we wound up, after all of the cuts and the changes and everything, with about 2,900. So it's still a very decent sized space. And then once we kind of had that solidified, it was okay. Looking at the plans, what are the dimensions of the room? Okay, and then the next thing was, what is the flow that we're looking for? And that allows us to achieve what we want to do. With the program that I talked about earlier, our daily, kind of flow, what allows us to achieve that best. And so we started looking at things, and it was, okay, number one, the gym is connected to the physio room, right? There's just a little hallway, but the guys can walk straight, to and from. So it's not disconnected, because we want, like, our medical staff is very much, exercise based, right? And so we want guys going from there into the gym and vice versa, and have it all be kind of one thing. And then the next was, in an ideal world, how do we want things set up? If we're looking at, we believe in lifting, right? We believe in strength and power and speed being a significant part of our physical development program, no matter what age you are. What's the best way we can achieve that so that we have a good flow? And also we're not asking guys to be there for forever because they're all waiting for the same thing, just little things that you run into. And so what my idea is taking it kind of from the college football realm, where a lot of times, they'll have basically the position groups, kind of lift together, right? And they'll have 20 racks because there's so many, players with college football, but they'll have a group of 4 or 5 who are the same position that are lifting together, right? And then maybe, one strength coach is responsible for a couple of different groups. My idea was, okay, let's do that, not necessarily by linking players who are in position groups, but let's have groups of 3 to 4 players who are basically at the same station, the whole time, right? So we need to have everything available at each one of these stations, so they're not moving all over the place. And basically we need to make it very time efficient. If they're going to walk right off the pitch and then change into their runners and then basically get into the lift, what's going to allow them to be the most efficient with their time, so they can get their work done, and then also go do whatever else they need to do for fueling, recovery, etc. And so we wound up going with 4 what they call double half racks from Play. We have Play doing our whole facility basically, and so it's basically 2 racks, one on either side. And so that allows us to have 8 stations. So if we split up, our our roster, that's 8 groups, 4 players. Some might have 3. And so some of them might be the same position group, but others may not. It's more, let's put them together into groups based on what their needs are and what their lifting programs are, right? So there may be a forward and a central defender who need the same thing and are kind of doing a similar program. And so let's link them and put them in so that they're using the same stuff. But it was really just, how can we group guys together, and then everything is at the rack that they need, with all the extensions, everything. Then we have power blocks behind them, at a station, so they need that, a bench, everything. So they can literally stay at that station for the entire lift, other than we have some Kaisers out on an open space. We have 6 Kaisers for them to use for any of the cable stuff. But the goal was, let's get them together and have them lift together so that they're, again, being efficient with their time. But then also it helps to kind of build a little camaraderie, because they become, this is their lifting group for the season, right? Or if we change it later on, but they are doing stuff off the pitch with these guys that maybe aren't the ones that they necessarily hang out with, outside of the facility as well. And then it was, okay, what else can we add to it? What do we want? And we're big believers in VBT. So we are putting a perch VBT device at every single station. So we'll have 8 of those. And so between that, and then also we have Bridge Athletic that delivers all the programs to their phones or iPads. On each rack, we're basically going to have a perch, a tablet and then an iPad with the bridge program. So the players will be able to walk right up, click start on both, and it'll tell them, and they're just going to go through their program all right there, the 3 or 4 of them together, and it'll be very efficient. They're all doing similar stuff for the most part. Some things might be a little bit different individually based on their needs or their position group, but then they get through it and then they can continue on to the next phase. And then, so that was kind of how we wanted to design it from the lifting standpoint. And then we also wanted to make sure that we had enough open space for a lot of functional things, obviously the Kaisers, but we have the guys do individual prehab programs every day. And then also we do a team kind of movement prep session together before they go on the pitch. And so for us, the additional thing with that, with the movement prep and also for some of the rehab and return to play stuff, was we wanted to have a big turf space, but we didn't necessarily want it to be in the middle of the facility or on the side like it is, in a lot of places, because we just felt like that would take away a lot of space. And so we talked to the architects and our facilities manager, and we decided to put it outside, just along the side of the building. And there's going to be an overhang, so it protects a little bit from the weather. But we'll have roll-up doors so the guys can walk right out on the turf, and they can do the entire movement prep out there. Or if we're doing any, sprint mechanics or acceleration mechanics or anything like that, if we want to be getting a 1080, like who knows. But it's right there outside the facility, so it's almost like an extension, and that is another 1,000 square feet. And so it's long. It's about, I want to say it's 12 wide by about 75 feet long. So it's a large area. And so we kind of add that to it. And then it's like, okay, well, now we have about 4,000 square feet total. So that allows us to open up the rest of the facility a little bit so we can have some of our cardio stuff, but then some functional space. We decided we wanted to get an altitude chamber to help, especially in the return to play process. And then on top of that, all of the testing that we do that I was talking about earlier, in one of the corners of the gym, we are going to have it be our testing area where all the testing equipment is set up. So we've got 2 force frames, we've got 2 force decks, we've got a Nord board, a couple other things. And then we actually are going to have motion capture around that as well. And that way, everything is right there. And so whether it's us, the reserve team, the academy, if they need to do any testing or anything like that, it's all right there, easily accessible, so we can get it done and we can have it part of their morning routine. And so that was kind of another thing that we wanted to have, is everything in the facility, in the gym, at your fingertips, so that you can just go from one thing to the next, whether it was before training, movement prep, or after training during the strength and power sessions.
I can hear the jealousy from a lot of coaches, Adam, on that are working in facilities. Not quite the same, but yeah. I feel like one of the main things to take away from that, obviously, that's the facility sounds incredible, and it sounds like you've done a great job as well creating that space. That's what a lot of people chase, isn't it? But also the main thing I think for coaches to take away from that is what you mentioned around the flow. And regardless of how big your space is, what equipment you've got, I think that's the most important thing to take into consideration, isn't it? What's the session going to look like? Where are the bodies going to be? What's the pattern in terms of where people go where? That's most important, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think I took a lot of lessons from my previous stops. We didn't have a thing that was anywhere near that big in Minnesota United, but I was able to create kind of a flow, that where they go from one to the next throughout the whole lift each time we did that. And to be honest, when I was in Reno, I mean, our gym was about 2 broom cupboards combined, and so it was really about the flow and the timing and how do I get a group of athletes to come through, get their stuff done efficiently, and then the next group comes in, and then the next group comes in, and so I think every stop I've had in the past has allowed me to understand how important that flow is and the timing of things. And I think I've been able to put it to good use as far as the design of this. And I'm really excited. We're opening it, hopefully end of June-ish, as long as there's no delays. And I can't wait to get in there the first day and just kind of look at it and watch as our players come in and say, like their reactions, but also just how it all works together and how much more efficient they'll be with their time. And I think it's going to pay a lot of dividends for, years.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said before about creating that buy-in, you've worked on that already with what's been done previously, but then adding this layer on top of it, which is a big layer, is massive, isn't it? Players are going to enjoy coming in. It ties in with what I spoke about with Andreas Beck in a couple of episodes ago about their facility over at Frankfurt. Players enjoying coming into the facility and getting the work done as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of our goal too, and we're adding a few special pieces and touches to some of the walls and some of the other accents on some things that players are not really that privy of right now, other than a few who are involved in the process that I think is going to touch on that as well, where they're going to walk in the first day and look around and say, oh wow, like I want to come in here every single day to be in this environment, and that's our goal. The more that they want to be a part of it, and the more they want to do the work, again, our whole thing is keep them healthy, available, and performing at their best, right? And so the more that they're coming and doing that work, the better we're going to be equipped to keep them in those three buckets.
Yeah, 100%. I could talk about the facility stuff all day, but we'll move it on a little bit, Adam, because I want to touch on, you mentioned before about your role now, head of performance, but also the creation of the reserve team, the academy, all feeding into the first team. And from that, obviously, that includes hires in terms of reserve team, head of performance or strength conditioning coach, sports scientist, whatever their role is, and also academy. So I was going to ask, what were some key considerations or traits you were looking for in those people to go into those roles?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for us, it is interesting. It's kind of unique. Our club started its academy a year before the MLS team started, right? So once it was announced and the owner bought the rights, and the process had begun as far as the first team coming into MLS, they started the academy the year before that just to get a jump on things. And so this is year 2 of the club, but year 3 of the academy. And so they had a performance coach, one who was working with the academy before we even got here. And so when they announced the reserve team, which competes in the new league for MLS called MLS Next Pro, and it's kind of like an under 23 team, under 21 team. The club was very confident and wanted to basically promote the academy performance coach up to the reserve team because he had been here from the beginning, and they felt like he deserved the opportunity, and we agreed. We wanted to give him that opportunity to grow within the club, and this is the next step up. And he had a little bit of experience with the reserve team in Seattle for a bit before coming to the academy here, and so that part was easy for us because we already had him in place, and it was okay. We're gonna bump him up to the reserve team and give him more responsibility with true professionals, and also more room to learn and grow. And then it was okay. How are we hiring for the academy? And for us, it was we wanted somebody who had the experience. There's a lot of places around that the academy hires will be fresh green right out of university or wherever it is. But we wanted somebody who had experience coaching because they are, for us at least right now, they're the only performance coach that works with the academy. We're hoping to bring others on in the near future. But we wanted somebody who had the experience of coaching, but also coaching youth athletes, right? Because it's a whole other can of worms. And for us, not only did we want them to have that experience coaching youth athletes, we really were looking for somebody who that was their passion. Because there's too many people and too many interviews and things that we've gone through. Our field is everyone is trying to move up the ladder, right? That's just the way it goes. And there was just too many times where you're speaking to somebody and you could just see that their intentions are okay. If I'm here a year or two, then I can move up to this, then I can move up to this. And we wanted somebody who wanted to grow with the academy and really be the head of performance for the academy, so to speak. And continue to develop it and really enjoy being in that space, because that passion will serve those players so much more than somebody who's just looking to get to the next level. And so we were lucky and blessed that the person that we have now, Jamie Blair, he ticked all those boxes. He had plenty of experience working with youth athletes, but he was incredibly passionate about it. And that's something that he loves to do. And it drives a lot of what he is as an employee and as a colleague, but in general, you could just tell, and the players respond to him really well. And so for us, it was a win-win when we came across him, and he was interested, and he was already actually in the Charlotte area, which is fantastic. And so he's been great. And he's also somebody that obviously, like, I always would like to have in mind when we're hiring people. Like, I want to be able to move them up the ladder. I want somebody to grow within the club and continue, because I think that that will pay a lot of dividends in the future as the players move up that ladder as well, having some consistency. But the fact that Jamie is so passionate about the youth space, you can tell there's no urgency on his part where he's saying like, okay, where do I go next? Where do I go next? It's like, no, I'm looking at projects that I can put in place here at the academy and work on for the next 2, 3, 4 years to really build this out and help it be the best academy it possibly can be, And so that was kind of the main thing for us. And at every level, including Devin Manifold, who was our reserve team performance coach who had previously been in the academy. It was also when we're putting people in place, along with the strength conditioning coach that we hired this year, Pete Gorka. It's who are we coming across that is also willing to put the time in to build the foundations for the entire club, right? Because again, this is a unique opportunity where we're in year 2 and we're still building those foundations. We're still building out the frameworks. How do we do this? How do we do that? Procedures, policies, etc. It's not like you're just getting a job at a existing club that's been around for however long, and you come in and it's this is the way it's done. Okay, I'm gonna follow this and maybe make some tweaks here and there. It's like, who wants to come in and really sink their teeth into this project and say, okay, we can build the foundation for this club. We want this club to be around for hundreds of years, but we can be the foundation for the next 3, 4, 5, 10 years until the next group comes in and builds upon that. And so everybody that we've brought in and we've promoted up are people that want to be part of that and want to have that input and want to take the extra time on top of what they're doing with their current teams in their roles to meet and go over and work on those larger picture projects to really, build things out in the performance space as best as we possibly can.
I think it's a great point to bring up. And it's, again, something we've touched on before around academy roles, because you mentioned before that a lot of clubs will put coaches in the roles as like a starting point in their careers. But essentially, that's the point of development for players, isn't it? Through academy ages. So having someone that's experienced, like you just mentioned, with a real passion, sometimes I feel personally it can be a little bit of a waste to get them through to a first team level and take them away from working with players in that age group. So I think it's a great point to bring up.
Yeah, I think that was where we were coming from, is, and on top of the fact, like I said, he's the only performance coach in that space. So we need somebody with the experience to know how to manage 5 teams at a time, right? And make sure that they're all, getting what they need from a physical development standpoint. But yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think in my experience and from my perspective, like putting the inexperienced coaches in there just because it's the lowest level is not the way to go. I'd rather have them be an assistant to somebody else at a different level where they can learn from somebody instead of having to learn on the job while also you're the one touch point for that age group. I think like you said, it can be a disservice at times.
Yeah, brilliant. Adam, that's absolutely flown by. I can't believe we've done 40 odd minutes already. I'm just a little bit wary on time, because I wanted to get through the quick fire questions as well. But I've got to say, it sounds like a really exciting time over there with everything you've done so far, and also with the facility opening and all the rest of it. So I'll definitely be looking out for any sort of media that comes out with the facility, and great work by the sounds of it on everything that's been done so far as well. Looking forward to seeing the players getting some work done in there. We always finish with these now, mate. So the first one is, who would you say has been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Yeah, I think I've mentioned a few of them. I think the first one for me is Jim Liston, who he is now, I don't know, senior director of performance and innovation at LA Galaxy, something along those lines. But he's, anybody who is here in the US and anyone who's familiar with MLS, he's just an absolute legend. He's been around in the league for 20 plus years at various clubs. And he was the strength conditioning coach, head of performance type when I was the intern at Chivas USA. And so he's the first one who gave me the chance in MLS, but also was the type of person he is, the type of rapport he has with the players. He really just taught me a lot about the relationships you have with the players and achieving the buy-in and things like that, but also how the league really works, because I was only a few years out of my undergrad. And as you know, and everyone who works in the field knows, they don't teach you a lot of the stuff that you actually need to know in your university courses, right? So he kind of exposed me to a lot of that, and how things work practically, and all of that, and kind of gave me my start. And he and I have been in touch, all over the years. And every time whatever team he's with has come to play the team that I'm with, we always grab coffee, catch up. We always chat on the phone. I'll give him a call when I'm seeking some mentorship advice, things like that. So he's definitely the first one that comes to mind to start my career. And then another one who may not be as well known to the broader audience, but even in the US, is his name is Ron Chenault. He's currently the, again, kind of high performance director at San Jose Earthquakes, and he was the head of performance at San Jose, who brought me in based on the recommendation of another person who was the head athletic trainer there. And he gave me the shot to get back into the team setting. And I was working in Reno, and had calls with him every single week to catch up and basically, report what's going on. And we had a lot of good conversations based on just performance in general, and the different things I was learning, but the different things that they're doing at San Jose, and how to kind of mirror what they were doing, because we were their reserve team. And we just had a lot of really, really good conversations. And he wound up leaving there and becoming the head athletic trainer for the U.S. national team during this past World Cup cycle. And then now he's back at San Jose. And so he's just somebody who really had an impact as far as once I got back into the team setting, and kind of a lot of the way that I think nowadays, and some of the things that I put into practice, I would say, just some good conversations there. And then another one who's been huge for me, and I'm sure you'll know the name, and anybody who's kind of affiliated with football will probably know the name, is Darcy Norman. I've been super, super lucky and privileged to call him a mentor for the past, 4 or 5 years. It just happened that after he left AS Roma, he came back to the States, and he was living in he's living in Lake Tahoe, which is where he'd been living before he left to go to Europe. And Reno is 35 minutes from where he lived, outside of Lake Tahoe. And actually Ron connected us and said, "Hey, do you know who Darcy Norman is?" I said, "Absolutely, obviously." And he's like, "Well, he's back in Truckee, which is outside of Lake Tahoe. Let me connect you guys and see if you guys can meet up." And we just sat and grabbed a beer the first time and talked shop, and had an awesome conversation. And he invited his wife to come down to meet us, and we had dinner and stuff. And it was just kind of like all right, well, while I'm here, let's get together once a month or once every 2 months and just, catch up. And, you can pick my brain, I can pick yours, all this other stuff. And we just have continued that, basically since then. Obviously I've moved on, but he's been pretty influential, because I'm pretty sure he's one of the people who's put my name forward for several of the jobs that I've gotten. And, obviously he was the head performance coach for the U.S. national team in the last World Cup cycle, and is now the head performance for the national team now. And, but just, he's somebody I can call at any time and just say, "Hey, can I pick your brain on this?" I did it over the weekend with some other things, and he's always happy to help, and has been a huge influence on looking at things differently, and kind of giving me his experience and advice from what he's done at Bayern Munich or the German national team or AS Roma or with the US. And so it's somebody that I know I can always kind of lean on, like I said, with Jim Liston before, to just ask for advice or bounce ideas off of. So I think those are the biggest three for me as far as who have influenced my career.
Brilliant. What would you say your biggest strength is, Adam, as a practitioner?
It's a good question. I think my adaptability, I would say, obviously with the background and career that I went over earlier, there's been a lot of times where it's just kind of like, all right, you got to do everything, or you got to do this and that. And like, you have to wear multiple hats. Right. And, I know for a while the industry kind of went in the direction of, being a specialist and being kind of staying in your lane. And I'm a firm believer that, you need to have expertise in a certain area, but you also need to be able to kind of cover multiple areas, and be sufficient, and have some expertise in a lot of different areas, and wear multiple hats and be a jack of all trades. And that's going to serve you better. Even if you have experts in every single area in your club, that it just allows you to communicate and converse with them more regularly and understand. So I think for me, that's my biggest strength, is I'm always willing to learn from others or learn from other areas. But also if somebody says, "Hey, we need you to do this," or "Can you pivot and do this on a dime?" it's like, yep, I'll figure it out, and I've done a decent job so far, I think. So I think that's kind of my biggest strength.
Brilliant. If you were able to speak to Adam, maybe just coming out of university after your studies, what would be your top bit of career advice for yourself?
I mean, I think number one is to never stop learning. It's cliche, but and it doesn't always have to be exactly what you're in, like what you're working in, but to keep learning, keep kind of the brain going on something all throughout your life. And the other one for me, the biggest one is be patient and don't rush the process. And that can be all different types of areas in your life, but especially for the career. I think I was very antsy and wanted to do this, wanted to do that. And like I said before, a lot of young coaches are kind of, how do I get here and there and there and there? And it's more like, no, for me, be patient, enjoy what you're doing, like really own that, and don't rush the process, because the next thing is gonna come at some point. Whether that's the next role, the next team, the next player, the next whatever it is. I think if you just really sit and enjoy what you're doing, that's where the good things happen. And when you try to rush the process, that's where mistakes are made, or there winds up being issues down the line and things like that.
Definitely. Final one, mate. What is your approach now, especially with everything you've had going on recently with CPD, continued development, continually progressing as a practitioner?
Yeah, I think it's changed for me over the years. I think now I'm more concerned with what's going to help in the environment now, like with what we're doing. So our strength coach, Pete Gorka, and I were talking recently, and we're looking at a lot of our testing data, and how can we make it more efficient, and how can we look at things better. And there's a really great course through Matt Jordan on force plates and things like that. And he brought it to my attention and said, hey, I think we should look at this. Like, there are other people in the league and other sports and stuff that have told me it's a really great. And I looked at it and said, yeah, let's do it. After it's like, this is something that we're working on now, and we can learn from it, and we can continue to make this process better. So let's do it now. And so I think that's the first part, is what can help you right in this moment. And then the second is, what are you interested in for your future, right? Because we're always thinking about that. And for me, I'm actually starting I don't know if you're familiar with the FSI, the Football Science Institute. They have a master strength conditioning course, and I'm kind of just I decided to go through that, just to go through it, see if I can pick up some stuff, because it's obviously very European based. And also I'm interested in potentially having an intern from there come over. And so I just decided I was going to do it myself, to go through some things. But in looking down the line, as far as how can I better myself, and then even further down the line, one of the things I'm looking at is some like organizational leadership type of things that are not in football whatsoever, right? But it's more as a head of performance, and then who knows where it goes from here. But like, how can I manage people better? Learning to manage, learning to make sure that the tree underneath me and our organization is being run really well and efficiently. People enjoy being here. They want to be here. What are the different types of leadership that I can provide in different areas of the club and roles, and then how can I also help to build future leaders within this club. And so I think that's another thing that I kind of have in the back of my mind, that in the future I'm going to be kind of taking some courses in that. I don't know if I'm going to go the full PhD route like Dave Tenney did, but it's definitely something in the back of my mind of like, okay, that's kind of the next step beyond just being a really good practitioner and the head of performance. But now that I'm overseeing a lot of stuff with the club, it's making me realize that, like, I need to be thinking even bigger and more broader and outside the scope of just, the general practitioner and all the little nitty gritty things that we get, the minutia that we can get involved in on a day-to-day basis.
Adam, that's been brilliant, mate. Thank you very much for coming back on. It's great to catch up and see the sort of transition in roles, but also everything that's going on at the current club as well. It's exciting times. So just finish us off with, if people want to reach out, they want a conversation, where would you direct them?
Yeah, no, I mean, first off, thanks again for having me. This was great. It was really enjoyable. I love listening to the pod on a regular basis, so it's always fun being on here. But if people want to reach out to me, there's two places that I always suggest. The first is LinkedIn. I'm usually pretty active on there. I don't post a bunch on there, but I'm usually pretty active as far as responding to messages and things like that. I think it's really easy for me to jump on and have conversations with people, whether you're a young new practitioner or somebody who's been around a long time and wants to, have conversation about whatever you want. I'm usually pretty open on there. And then the other one is Instagram. My handle is at Parr Fitness, and it's the same thing. I'm usually pretty easy to get a hold of on there. Obviously during the season on either one, it might take me a few days to get back to you because we're in the throes of, a lot of fixtures, especially right now. But those are the two areas that you can find me on. I'm not on Twitter at all, and their email is hit or miss. So I'd suggest those two.
Brilliant, mate. Well, Adam, thank you very much for coming back on, mate, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Awesome. Thank you.